Oh, look at all those happy faces out there, smiling faces. You guys are awesome. Got some Bigfoot stories for you. All right, here we go. This email is from Rhoda. She writes, I'm normally considered very respectable and truthful, so my Bigfoot story would come as a big surprise to most people who know me. In truth, I have kept quiet about this for most of my life. I am now 53 years old, and what I have to say happened in 1976 when I was 10 years old. Things were different. Moms mostly stayed home to care for their kids. The men from our area of southeast Louisiana normally left home to work offshore for weeks at a time. There were less houses and businesses and more cow pastures, sugarcane fields, and woods. We had recently moved further up the bayou because my parents wanted a large piece of property so they could explore the woods and have a log cabin. They were very adventurous. It had not been long that my parents allowed me to stay home, alone, for short periods of time. I don't even know exactly where they went, but except for my beagle mixed dog Blackie, I was alone. It was early afternoon, and I was in my bedroom when I heard Blackie start to bark. Her bark was getting more and more fierce, so I looked out my window, and something caught my eye, so I looked downwards. I saw a Sasquatch go under my bedroom into the garage. What? It was so tall that it needed to put its head down towards the right. Then all I heard was Blackie barking and lots of crashing sounds and whimpering sounds. I became terrified that the creature would know I was upstairs and somehow come up and get me. I locked the door and tiptoed to my closet and closed myself in the dark, and I hid behind hanging clothes. I became afraid that the creature would smell me or hear me, and then it would find me, and I was certain that it was going to kill my dog. At that time, I had asthma, which had not been diagnosed yet, but when I would get upset or cry, I would make these embarrassing squeaky noises, and I knew I was going to cry because I felt so bad that a monster I didn't even believe in yesterday was killing my dog, and all I could do was hide in my closet and cry. So I held my hand over my mouth and nose so that I could barely breathe. I figured that if it could hear me, that I would be killed. I don't know how long I was in the closet when it got quiet. I still stayed there for a while. I tiptoed to the window, but I only opened the tiniest opening to look outside. I did catch a glimpse of the creature one last time. It was heading in the woods in a southeasterly direction, and it was going very fast, faster than I can imagine any human running. It took me a long time to gather enough courage to descend the stairs to the garage. My dog was terrified and laying down and shaking. She did have her head up, but she didn't seem to want to move, and her nose was bleeding. I couldn't figure out why Bigfoot had attacked my dog. Now, I might as well admit that a few people were claiming to have seen Bigfoot in our area, but most didn't believe them. We used to like to eavesdrop on the adults, and I remember one man telling his story, and he knew that no one believed him, and he became so upset that he actually was fighting tears. Suddenly, I knew why he was so upset. He was telling the truth, and no one believed him. I knew no one would believe me either. I cleaned up my dog, and I did the best I could to calm her down. When I was about 40 years old, I decided to tell my parents that there really was a Sasquatch monster. I don't know why they didn't believe their friend, but for whatever reason, they believed me. I also asked my siblings if they had ever seen it, and my sister hadn't, but my brother claimed to have seen it also. These days, people are encroaching more and more into the woods, and sugarcane fields and pastures are being developed as subdivisions, so I don't hear new stories. People my age who live close to the land are more likely to believe in Bigfoot than others. My boyfriend and most of his childhood friends know of their existence, but it's not like we're going to start a support group, although maybe we should. So here I will try to just wrap it up with my description of the creature. It was about 9 feet tall from my estimation, judging from the height of the ceiling in the garage. Its hair was black. I would say it was 40 inches from shoulder to shoulder, and it had a huge head. I couldn't say if it had a neck from the angle that I saw it, but it didn't move exactly like a human. I have no idea how my dog survived, and for a long time, my story didn't make sense when compared to other stories about how shy and peaceful these creatures are. But recently I have listened to others telling stories of Sasquatch taking their dogs. Maybe that's all it wanted. There was nothing else in the garage except for my dog Blackie. I now own the woods, and I do some farming and gathering in the woods. Sometimes I'm in a clearing and surrounded by tree lines. I think about the monster and I say, "Are you still there? You don't need to show yourself to me. I already know you are real." I don't wish anyone to know what I know. If you don't believe, I don't care. But if you find out what I already know, you will be very afraid. The thousands of people who describe pretty much the same creature don't come up with this stuff just for attention. Woo! That is, I can just see her cowered in that closet behind we live in a cinematic age where we relate things that people tell us and we picture movie reels in our head, and that's what I'm seeing with her, just terrified in that closet. And man, that's a scary story, Rhoda. I mean, it really is, and you still live there. I wonder if you've seen anything else since then. But great story, and thank you for sending that. I loved it. Oh, this one's going to be a good one. I think it's the first story I've ever gotten from South Dakota. The writer wants to leave her name out of it, which is no problem. She writes, "In the spring of 2012, I had to make a trip to the capital city of South Dakota for a business meeting. I arrived the evening before the meeting and checked into a hotel room. I had chosen the hotel that sat along the Missouri River. I thought the peacefulness of the river was beautiful, and I had planned to spend some time on the small beach at the water's edge before I left town. After getting checked in and settled in my room, I decided to get a quick bite to eat at the hotel restaurant. After dinner, I returned to my room and sat up for a while reading documents for the next day's meeting. I was in bed by 11:30 p.m. At 2 a.m., something startled me awake. I lay in bed listening, hearing nothing and feeling confused about what it was that woke me. I got up to use the bathroom and decided to go outside to get some air and look at the starry night sky. I walked about 6 feet from the building and was gazing upward. I hadn't been standing there more than 5 minutes when I heard a bone-chilling scream. It sounded like a woman being abused. The scream came from the area closest to the railroad bridge going across the river. Instinctively, I started running towards the bridge. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I had to help who I thought was a woman in trouble. Here's a little side note about me. I grew up the only girl with 3 younger brothers on a farm. Later, I would be the first female in my family's history to join the military. I'm a Gulf War veteran. My friends and family know that I have grit and will most likely be the first one to step up in the defense of someone or to offer a helping hand when life gets you down. I have a big soft heart, but I'm also a strong woman. Now back to the event. I had moved maybe 10 or 12 feet from where I had been standing when I heard a very loud scream or growl, followed by a pounding on the rails of the bridge. Whatever was pounding the bridge had to have enormous strength because it literally made the steel vibrate. I stopped dead in my tracks. I leaned forward slightly to look towards the bridge to see if I could see what was screaming and pounding on the steel. It did it again and then again. The scream intensified, and the last one was followed with a long howl. Suddenly, in the tree line directly to the left of me, I heard running and dogs barking. Many dogs. Fear surged through me, and I turned to run back to the hotel. I could hear loud footsteps behind me. Whatever it was that had been screaming was chasing me. The dogs barked inside the tree line as they too ran, making a lot of noise. I could hear them crashing through the trees. My mind was spinning, trying to find some kind of logic to what I was experiencing. None of it made sense to me, but I was more scared than I had ever been in my life. I get to the entrance of the hotel, and for a split second I thought about going further forward to the main entrance and report what was happening, and then quickly dismissed it. I just wanted to get inside. I used my key card to get in the building. I was terrified. The door had a delay as it closed, and I was sure that thing was going to get in. I got to my room, which was just inside the door, and I closed and locked the door behind me. My heart was beating out of my chest. I was so scared. I stood close to the door, trying to calm down, when I saw through the small opening in the curtains someone walk past my window. Slowly, I walked to the window. I was very scared, but I had to see what was out there. I stood to the side of the window against the wall and slowly moved the corner of the curtain just far enough so I could see out. Bam! Something hit the other window closest to the bed. I jumped back and quickly walked to the bathroom, and I closed the door. I stayed in the bathroom about 15 minutes before coming out. I stood just inside the bathroom door listening to see if that thing was still outside my window. It was quiet, so I slowly walked to the bed and I crawled under the covers. I had to get some sleep to be fresh for my morning meeting. As I lay there, thoughts spun in my head. It certainly couldn't have been dogs making that scream or banging on the bridge. Where had the dogs come from? I eventually dozed off and slept through the night. The next morning, I got up and ready for my meeting. Looking at the clock, I decided that I'd had time to walk down to the river to check things out. Maybe I would find tracks or whatever it was I heard and what was chasing me. I walked as far as the bridge, but I didn't see anything. I was still feeling frightened and uncomfortable, so I turned and headed back to the hotel, got in my car, and drove to the meeting. Later that afternoon, I was done with what I had come to town for and decided to once again go down by the river and look for tracks. This time, I walked a bit further past the bridge, but still didn't see anything. This incident has stayed solid in my memory for the past 7 years. I still am not sure what it was that was out there that night. I have only told a couple of people, my two closest friends, about it. They believe me and have suggested that it's quite possible that it was a Bigfoot. But was it? I don't really know. And then she ends the email with, "This is a true story. South Dakota has had many Bigfoot sightings over the last 10 years or so, especially on the reservations." Now that's an unusual story. Most people are camping or deer hunting or taking a hike or, going through the woods. I'm assuming if you're staying in a hotel, it's a semi-urban area close to the river, but still, and you're getting some kind of activity close to an urban area. That's amazing. Thank you so much for the story. I thought it was great. She did a great job writing it. It was very easy to read and understand. Thank you very much, ma'am. This next story is sent by Danny from, I don't think he tells me where in Australia he is from. I'm looking here, but I don't see it. Maybe he'll say it in the story. But this is a good one. I don't send many emails, so forgive my mistakes. I only have 2 short and a little boring encounters that happened to friends. The first was when I was 9 years old. Me and my friend were going away with his parents. As we were driving along, my friend's mom turned to her husband and says, "Tell the boys what happened to you." My friend's father had never told him either, and he was reluctant to tell it. Then he told us that he was driving in a convoy of cars from Sydney to Melbourne. He was on a 2-lane road, one road each way going uphill, with thick bush on both sides, when he rounds the corner and his high beams light up a giant hair-covered man. He said this thing stared at him for 2 or 3 seconds. It was caught in the middle of the road and then took off at full speed, running uphill in thick bush at night with no light. He said the first chance he got, he pulled over and thought about what he had seen. You know, Dixie, in my little 9-year-old mind, I never doubted his story, and not a single word is ever spoken about this again, but I kept this in the back of my mind. The next time I was told a story was when me and a friend were having a drink at my unit to mourn a good mate who had died in a freak accident. We called him Redmond. We were 21 years old. The show, Believe It or Not, came on, and there was a segment about Bigfoot. And my mate Gary said Redmond said he had seen one of those things here in Australia when he went on a camp for school. Gary said Redmond told him that a couple of the boys were going to sneak out to the girls' camp, which was about 100 meters from the boys' camp. 20 meters away from the girls' camp, there was a tap and a shower. Redmond told Gary the 3 boys walked up and saw a tall, hairy man catching the drops from the shower in its mouth. The boys went one way and the hairy man went the other. The 2 stories got me on the path to believing Bigfoot, Dixie. One day at work, Dixie, a few boys were all sort of laughing at Bigfoot and me for being a believer. Later in the day, one of the boys came up to me and said, "You know, Danny, I saw something while I was riding a trail bike once. This big dark figure crossed the track and scared the crap out of me, but he wouldn't say that in front of anyone else. Do I believe him? Yes, he's not that dude, and he's not full of bullcrap." And he ends the email, and he ends with a real nice email salutation to me, and I really appreciate it. But Danny, that's great. I think the Australian Yowie is in one way as popular as the American Bigfoot in North America, but I also think if they're there are just as many of them. As North Americans, we always think of Bigfoot as just a North American creature, but apparently they're all over the place. I don't know, but it's real interesting. Danny, this was really well written, and I thank you for taking the time to send it. I loved it, and I appreciate it, buddy. This story or this email came from Brandy, and it's an Arkansas story. And I've actually spent a lot of time at this place through the years, so this is interesting to me. She writes, "We have listened to your stories for quite a while, and we love the way you respect each story and tell her without ridicule. I don't care if you use my name or not. I know what went on that night because I was there, and I know what we experienced was very real. I have told close friends and relatives about the incident, and after listening to your channel, I thought you and your listeners might enjoy it as well. I had just gotten married in 1987 to my husband, who was a good old Arkansas boy from the sticks. We were a lot younger then and very adventurous. We decided on the spur of the moment to take a 2.5-hour trip to my favorite spot, Gunner Pool, close to Blanchard Springs in the Arkansas Ozarks. We both loved the outdoors, and my pregnancy was far enough along. This would probably be my last camp for a while. I have PTSD from past traumas and really don't like being around people I don't know or crowds, so we picked a spot on the road that was a long way from the actual campground and other campers, more like an overflow or deer camp area. We got everything set up and went to the creek until supper time and then returned to camp totally starving. My husband built the fire and we cooked supper and watched the stars come out before going to bed. When we were yawning more than talking, we decided it was time to turn in. We didn't put the fire out as we had a nice ring and cooking area set up. We just banked it well and went to bed. The coals left over in the morning would make fixing breakfast a bit quicker. I grew up in bear country in Northern California, so we had cleaned up well and put the food and trash in the Jeep. We figured we would have a nice quiet night's sleep before splashing down the creek the next day. We were wrong. After we turned in, we sort of started drifting off, and I felt the ground shake. Not like an earthquake, more like what you feel when you are right next to something heavy when it hits the ground. I asked him if he'd felt that, and he told me, shh, and he nodded his head. We listened for a while and realized there were no regular night sounds. We could only hear whatever this was moving in the brush outside our camp, and we could feel almost every step that it took. Neither of us run yellow or are easily spooked. He is 5'8" and probably 245 pounds solid muscle from a life of hard manual labor and mechanic work. But when we couldn't name anything that would pound the ground like that and continue to circle our camp, we got a little disconcerted. We tried to wait it out to see if it would go away, but it didn't. It continued to step harder and circle closer to our tent. We decided we were going to break camp and leave. My husband built up the fire for light and security. We had a single-shot 12-gauge shotgun, and my husband held that shotgun trained on the area and the noises, and I broke camp and I loaded up. My husband said later that he was afraid that wasn't enough firepower for whatever was out there, that it might have only made it mad. I know of nothing that big that is native to the Arkansas Ozarks, and this was before the Fish and Game reintroduced elk on the Buffalo River, and I have been around elk as well as mule deer and brown bears. This was no elk, deer, or bear or anything else I know of. I don't know what it was, but I was sure it didn't want us there. We never saw it and we never smelled it. We never really saw anything unusual. But I can tell you years later, we lived next to a buffalo ranch, and the way the ground shook when the buffalo would run was very similar. We are pretty sure it was something like a Bigfoot. We have been back to the area many times and even camped again a time or two. But we will never camp on that side of the road or that particular area again. Thank you for taking the time to read this account. I hope you and your listeners enjoyed it. And then she signs off. I think that's a typical Bigfoot story. But you know what's crazy is I work in a business with heavy stuff, cranes, heavy steel, columns and beams, and you know, when that stuff hits the ground, it really does shake the ground. I mean, you can feel it vibrate under your feet. And if something is walking beside you and making the ground do that, it must be huge. And it must have a big surface of whatever hitting the ground, like a Bigfoot. Hey, it's a Bigfoot. So anyway, it's a spooky story, and I'm really kind of surprised you guys go back there. But Blanchard Springs is a beautiful place. I've been there tons of times. I just love that place. Okay, Brandy, thank you very much. I thought the story was great. I really enjoyed it, and I know everyone else did too. Thanks. Okay, wow, that was 4 really cool stories. I just love reading these. Thank you all for clicking on the video. I guess I'll see you guys on the next one. Might try to get another one up later this weekend. Hope you have a great weekend. See you soon. Thanks.